Hi, I'm Laura Richcreek with Laura's Voice, and this is Laura Reads Foxed Books. Thanks for joining me. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're ready for Chapter 2 of Thomas Nelson Page's The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. This book and its illustrations are in the public domain. I have several notes, but would rather get into the chapter. Let me know if you prefer the notes before the chapter, after the chapter, or in the episode description to read when you have the chance. Your feedback will be really helpful as I fine-tune this podcast, so thank you in advance. And now, without further ado, let's read Chapter 2 of The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. 2. The Hill and Dale Carriage. 2 years or so after the summer morning when I met the old gentleman of the Blackstock coming out of the shady yard on that old street, it was, I remember, in the month of May, I was passing down a busy street one morning when a vehicle coming along attracted my attention. It was only one of a number of carriages that were coming down the principal driving street from the fashionable residence quarter of the town and were turning into the chief shopping street of the city. But of all the number, this one attracted my attention the most. For, whilst the others were shining city equipages, with showy teams and fashionable women lolling back in the easy and pretendedly indifferent style of ladies of fashion when they honor the trading section at the change of the seasons, who, if they knew me, condescended to acknowledge my bow with cold superciliousness. This vehicle, though I had never seen it before, was familiar to my mind and challenged my interest at once. It was an old country carriage, and as I walked along through the balmy springtime air, which felt like feathers on my cheek, I had just been thinking before I saw it of the country, and of the little willow-shaded stream with its deep pools, where I used to fish in spring when the leaves were tender like those above me, before I became a lawyer and a man of affairs. Just then the old carriage came swinging down the hill. It was antiquated and high-swung and shackling, as muddy as a country wagon, and drawn by 2 ill-matched, though not ill-bred horses, spattered with mud to their ear-tips, their long tails tied up in knots. It was driven by an old gray-headed man wearing a low beaver hat, a high white collar, and a pair of yellow buckskin gloves. It reminded me of the old carriage with its old driver, Uncle Bala, at home. But what struck me more than anything else as the vehicle passed me was that it was filled to the brim with fresh, young country girls, who, oblivious of the restraining requirements of fashion, were poking their pretty heads out of the windows, 3 at a time, to look at everything on the street that struck their fancy, and with glowing cheeks and dancing eyes were chattering to each other in the highest spirits, showing their white teeth, and going off into fits of laughter over the fun they were making for themselves. Whilst on the back seat, a sweet-faced lady, with grey, smooth hair and a patrician profile, smiled softly and happily upon them, well content with their gaiety and joy. They caught my eye, for I never saw more roses gathered in one carriage, and I had stopped and was staring at them open-mouthed, with a warm glow curling about my heart, and a growing tenderness coming over me as I gazed. I suppose I must have shown this somehow. I may even have sighed, for I thought again of my fishing days and of laughing country girls I knew whom these were so much like. One of them, particularly, struck me, and I was sure I had caught her gaze on me, when a hand was laid firmly on my shoulder, and a voice just beside me said, "My son, when you want a wife, stop a carriage like that and pick one out of it. You might almost do it at random. You could hardly go amiss." I turned, and there was my old gentleman of the Blackstock. He was clad in white linen, as immaculate as fresh snow. I smiled my thanks to him and passed on, whilst he walked up the street. I had not gone over 2 steps when someone touched me on the arm, and a gentleman, evidently a stranger in the town, said to me, "I beg your pardon. Can you tell me who that old gentleman is?" I turned, and he indicated my old friend, for at the moment I felt him to be such. He was walking up the street quite slowly, with his head a little bowed, and his hands, holding his ivory-headed cane, clasped behind his back, as lonely as an obelisk in a desert. "No, I am very sorry, but I cannot," I said. "Oh, I thought I saw you speak to him?" he said, with some disappointment in his tone. "I did, but I do not know his name. I have rarely seen a more striking-looking man. He might have walked out of the pages of Plutarch," said he meditatively as he went on. I do not know just how it was, but I found myself shopping all that day. As soon as I had gotten through whatever I was doing, I went back up the street and began to search diligently among the throng of vehicles there for an old carriage with a pair of wiry country horses and an old Negro driver wearing gauntlets. I went up square after square looking for it among the shining equipages with their pompous coachmen and glossy teams, and then, not finding it, went through the second shopping street. But all was in vain. It was plain that the driver was feeding his horses somewhere at a livery stable. So I went even so far as to enter 3 or 4 of the larger and more frequented dry goods stores on the street, in hopes of catching a glimpse once more of a pink face and a pair of laughing eyes which I had caught smiling at me out of the window of the old coach. I had wandered fruitlessly through several long floors, between aisles of women's backs of every shape and species of curve or stiffness, with attentive clerks or tired-eyed women standing over against them on the other side of the counters, and had just given up my search in despair and was returning somewhat downcast to my office, when I passed a milliner's window and happened to glance in. There were my rosebuds, clustered together in front of a large mirror, my special one in the midst of the group, with a great broad-brimmed straw hat covered with roses on top of her little brown head, shading her fresh face, making, as she stood before the mirror, pensively turning her little person from side to side, one of the prettiest pictures in the world. Fool that I was! I might have known that a girl would go first for a bonnet. She must have received a compliment just then, though whether it was from one of her sisters or from the glass only, I do not know. For at the same moment that she turned to her sisters, she suddenly smiled. Thank heaven! The sister stood on the side toward the window. I just loved her for it. A smile which lit up her face so that even the over-sheltering hat with its lovely roses could not shadow it, but seemed only a bower for the lovelier roses beneath. Lit up her face? It lit up the world. I had become so engrossed with the pretty tableau that I had forgotten I might be seen from within quite plainly, and I stood staring at my young beauty through the window, open-eyed and open-mouthed, until I became suddenly aware that she was looking through the glass past her sister and straight into my eyes. Then I gave quite a jump at my rudeness and rushed away. The look of embarrassment, almost bordering on horror, which was on her face as our eyes met, was all that I saw, and I almost fled toward my office. I learned afterwards that had I waited a second longer, I should have seen her confusion give way to uncontrollable amusement over my flight, and I learned later that her mimicry of my sudden agitation was long the entertainment of her special circle. If I fled, however, it was only a momentary stampede, which my growing ardor soon checked, and I stopped at the next corner, and crossing over the street took my post and waited to watch from a more secure quarter the exodus from that blessed Goshen. I had not long to wait, for soon from the door sallied all together the 3 young nymphs, each under a new, very wide, and, I have no doubt, very beautiful straw hat. But only one hat now filled my eye, the wide-brimmed creation which served as setting for the charming flower garden above, the yet more charming flower garden below, which even at that distance I could see glowing in the cheeks of the youngest, and possibly the tallest, of the 3 sisters. They passed down the street arm in arm, laughing heartily, especially my little lady in the middle, at something. I learned afterwards it was at my sudden consternation and unexpected flight, and turned in at a dry goods store, one which I had already threaded that morning in my vain search for my unknown little lady. If there was any common, though unwritten law against a man's going into a millinery shop, there was, thank heaven, none against his going into a dry goods store. At least, if he could devise some want which he might possibly get supplied there. I had the want beyond doubt. That shop now held what within the last few hours I had come to want more than anything else on earth. But a sweetheart, if she were wholly unknown, as happened to be the case with me, would palpably not do. I could not ask for her, so I cudgelled my brains for something that I might demand if I were halted within. I finally hit on neckties. Neckties have a sort of halfway place between a woman's wear and a man's gear, and besides give time in the examination and selection. So, having made this resolution, I ventured in. and found the same rows of feminine backs, augmented somewhat since my last exploration by new additions, bending over piles of every conceivable stuff, and the same assiduous clerks and tired women standing as before on the other side of the counters, engaged in a task as hopeless as telling Belshazzar his dream, telling women what they wanted when they did not know themselves. As I passed on, I heard many criticisms and not a few complaints, some harsh, some only petulant, from the women with backs, received for the most part in silence by the women without backs. Suddenly I was startled to find myself quite close to the large hat with the roses which I now knew so well. It was forming a bower for the pretty head, at that moment bending over several pieces of some lawny white stuff. The young lady's gloves were off, and the slender little hands were feeling the texture of the fabric, with a touch as soft as if it had been a baby's cheek. Her face, which I could see in profile, was deeply serious. "It is beautiful, beautiful. I wish I could get it," she almost sighed. "But I am afraid it is too dear for me. I have only so much to spend. Do you think you could possibly find anything a little lower and almost as pretty that you could show me?" She glanced up at the shop girl before her with a little smile. I was going to say almost pitiful, but the expression which came on her face as she looked into the tired eyes above her banished that. "Aren't you very tired?" she asked suddenly, with the sweetest, tenderest tone in the world. "I should think you would be." "Oh, it's a pleasure to wait on you," said the older woman sincerely, her face lighting up as she turned away to her shelves, pleased at the tone of sympathy. And who would not have thought so? I, at least, did, and overcome by a sudden feeling as my young rose nymph, whose face had lit up at the praise, turned to take a survey of the crowd about her. I, abandoning my idea of neckties, turned and hurried out of the store. It was a strange feeling, delicious to me. I knew that I must be in love. I did not even know her name, but I knew her eyes, her voice, her heart, and they were enough. As I came out on the street, there was the old carriage coming slowly along down, with the old driver leaning forward, looking anxiously to one side as if to recognize some given sign. "If you want a wife, stop a carriage like that and take one out of it. Even taking one at random you can hardly go amiss," had said my old gentleman of the Blackstock, and I believed him. I could not resist the temptation to go up and render my first act of assistance to the family. I signed to the driver, and he stopped. "You were looking for your young mistress?" "Yes, sir. Mistus tell me to come and stop right by 2 big rocks in front of a red stove. Dere's de stove, but I believe dee done moved dem rocks. I see 'em here dis morning when I went by." He leaned forward and gave another look. "They are there still," I said, recognizing the 2 carriage stones by his description. "But those carriages hide them." "Yes, sir. I never see sich folks in my life. Dey ain't got no manners in de world. Dey'll put de carriage right in your way, don't care what you do, and dey won't get out to save your life. Mistus told me to be here by 3, and—" "Why, it's only 1:30 now," I said. "Yes, sir, but I likes to be sort of promptual in town. See dem carriages by dem rocks now? I just want to get in dere once, and I bound dey on get me out again before my mistresses come. I don't like these city ways, and I never did like to be cityfied nohow. I got a right good ways to go, too." "How far do you live from town?" I asked him. I was growing guileful. "In about 18 miles, sir. I stopped before light this morning. I comes from Colonel Dale's old place. Hill and Dale, they calls it." I knew at once then who my wild rose was. The Dales were among the best old families in the state, and Hill and Dale was as well known to our people as the capital city, one of the famous country places celebrated for generations as the home of hospitality and refinement. Colonel Dale had died not very long after the war, from a wound received at Gaines's Mill, and had left a widow and a family of young daughters, whose reputation for beauty had reached me even before I left my country home, though I had never seen any of them, as Hill and Dale was in the farthest end of the county, quite 50 miles away from us. "Well, they are in that store now," I said, to put the old coachman's mind at rest. "At least, one of them is." "Is dey?" he asked, much relieved. The next second he gave a bow over my head. "Dere's Miss Lisbeth now," he said in some excitement, trying to attract her attention. "Miss Lisbeth! Miss Lisbeth!" he called. "Hear me! Hear me!" But it was in vain. I turned in some confusion, but she was standing under her big straw hat just outside the door, looking alternately up and down the street, evidently expecting someone who had promised to come and had not. My resolution was taken in a second, though to do it set my heart a thumping against my ribs. "Wait," I said. "I will tell her for you." And I actually walked up to her and, taking off my hat, said, "I beg your pardon, but I think your driver is there, trying to attract your attention." "Is he? Thank you. Where?" she said so sweetly that my already bumping heart began to bound. Then, as I indicated the direction and she caught the old man's eye, her face lit up with that charming smile which I can liken to nothing else but sunlight breaking forth on an already sweet and lovely prospect. "Oh, thank you," she said again, tripping away, whilst I passed on to make it appear that I had only happened accidentally to see her driver signal. I turned, however, a few rods farther on, as if quite casually, to get another peep at her. She stood on the very edge of the curbstone, bending forward, talking very earnestly to her driver out in the street. But just as I turned, she caught up her dress with a quick, graceful motion and tripped on tiptoe over to the carriage, showing as she did so just a glimpse of the daintiest pair of ankles in the world. Then the intervening carriages shut her out from view, and I went on. So the name of my prize was Elizabeth Dale, and I had spoken to her! I did not fail to pass along the street again, quite indifferently, a few minutes before 3, and again at frequent intervals, until more than many minutes after that hour. But though them 2 rocks were there, a standing monument, and the red store, hallowed by her having entered it, was there, and many other carriages came and went, the old coach from Hill and Dale came not, and neither did its pretty rose and sunshine mistress. The street seemed quite deserted. The town was suddenly empty. I went home to my boarding-house with new sensations, and if I was in love, I set all rules at defiance, for I ate like a ploughman and slept that night like a log. End of Chapter 2. Remember, there are some enrichment notes in the episode description if you'd like to better understand some of the references and vocabulary. This has been The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock by Thomas Nelson Page, illustrated by Howard Chandler Christie. Original copyright 1897. This edition copyright 1901. Production copyright 2025 by Laura Reed's Foxed Books. Thanks for being here. See you next week.